Hello, welcome to this week's lecture. There's so much to cover this week, and I probably can't cover it all in one video, but I am available to talk about anything if you would like to. I think it's really important to understand this week is about perceptions, our individual experiences, and also worldviews and the way societies are constructed around communication cultures. And we're going to really look at intercultural communication. I want you to think about from going from your own personal experiences and style and moving into these kind of meta or macro spaces back into your micro spaces. And think about, how do you view conflict? Last week we talked about the benefits of conflict, how conflict can be handled in functional ways. Was that new? Do you have positive experiences with dealing with conflict, or is it always a retraction, or is because conflict has been mostly negative? I think that is the majority of experiences. I think it's really difficult to find positive experiences in our past to conflict, but if you are in a relationship with someone who wants to explore that with you, it is difficult, sometimes emotional, and sometimes painful, but very rewarding to work through a functional way of dealing with conflict. But I do want you to kind of really personalize this lecture to your own experience. This week deals with perceptions and how we deal with empathy and cognitive complexity, which is being able to experience other people's perceptions or experiences other than your own. Now, just to be clear, perception taking means that you can relate to trying to understand other people's points of view. Maybe you can't completely know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. We can never know that, but you can. Perception taking is that you're curious and you ask questions and you are listening to try to understand. And that means that someone's also trying to understand you. We'll get more into that communication negotiations of how we negotiate listening and holding space for others. But that means that if you're going to do that, if you're going to listen, that means you need to understand how gender is impacting our conversations, how culture impacts our conversations, and how we should never minimize or explain away another person's experience. And that's really important, and not use our experience to attack others. So let's move into conflict narratives. Conflict narratives as part of the perception taking process. So a narrative is a story. And when we use the word narratives in communication, what we're talking about we have paradigms of narratives that we move into, and that's how we perceive the world through our expectations or our past experiences. If you have expectations of the way an interaction will go, and you bring that expectation, we have a tendency to move into biases that will become blind spots to us being able to perceive the other person or what's going on in that interaction. And that's can show up as confirmation bias or self-serving bias, and stereotypes that impact our paradigm narratives. Now, when we are looking at a conflict narrative, this is how we would tell the story of a conflict that we had. So if I asked you to tell me about a conflict, I would expect you to begin the story at the very beginning, a very good place to start, and you would tell me the story and come through that experience. Now, as we listen to people's narratives, when people are trained to listen to conflict narratives or other people's experiences, professionals will listen in a way to hear what is being selected as the pivotal points of a story, right? Because a lot of things are happening, but when it turns into a narrative, there's things that are deselected and things that are selected. And a narrative is a series of that person's perception process of what they believe is important to the impact of that story. And so they are selecting and highlighting the experience. Unless you had a camera from all different angles and all this sound and measurements on heart rate and sweat levels, you can never really, you're not, a conflict narrative is going to be really hard to be objective. So when we're listening to narratives, or when we're speaking a narrative or listening, the next thing we listen to is the attributions. So attributions are when we attribute a reason to a behavior. So usually when you're listening to a conflict narrative, you're going to hear basically judgments about other people's decisions, their choices. Even if it's a mystery, I don't know why someone would do this. That is, we're trying to attribute that. So attribution, another way to understand attribution theory is to think about our court system. When there's a prosecution and a defendant defending themselves, the prosecution is going to deliver the case of the crime and why this person is guilty, and they're going to have their opening statements, and they're going to have all their evidence, and they're going to have witnesses, and they're always trying to attribute the crime to that person, that they are a criminal, right? And that means the locus of attribution is internal, that something is wrong with this person. They have a pattern of behavior, and we're going to attribute the crime to them. Where the defense is going to say, I'm not a criminal, right? My client's not a criminal. This was beyond there was an external reason for it, or they're going to deliver evidence that they didn't do it at all, and maybe cast the blame in another direction to create doubt. But most of the time, what they're trying to do is to take the locus of the crime outside of that person and attribute it to external cause, and a different external cause. When we do this in our personal lives, we do it for all different kinds of things. Why does my neighbor play their music too loud? Why does my roommate drink my milk? Why? Attribution is the why. Now, fundamental attribution theory, or fundamental attribution error, is when we take the reason why, we make the locus something about the person themselves. Usually, fundamental attribution error is based on stereotypes or institutional and societal expectations, or kind of myths about groups of people. So when we identify we're dealing with someone in a group, whatever that label we've put on that person, and then they do a behavior, we say, oh, why is because they're in that box. I put them in that box. Society and stereotypes and all these biases, racism, sexism, ableism, all of these labels that can get put on someone, that we will then attribute their behavior back to that reason. And that's why we call it fundamental attribution error. Okay, so moving from that, we're going to move into Hofstede. Greet Hofstede is a German theorist, and he worked primarily through the 50s and 60s, developing different categories of communication cultures. Now, these communication cultures They, even though Hofstede was looking at nationalism as he developed them, and he scores different nations on how they relate to these, I want you to take this theory and move it down to the interpersonal level. And now, why am I struggling with this roommate? Why is my romantic relationship always having the same problem? Maybe some of these communication cultures, intercultural communication, can help us understand. Let's start with individualism and collective cultures. So, in an individual culture, this is a culture where children are raised to be as self-sufficient as possible, that you are brought up to, like, the prime directive of individualism is that you can take care of yourself. You can feed yourself, you can pay your rent, you can go to the store and come back on your own, and you can maneuver through the society, get a good job, start your own family, have your own home. Individual culture puts this up as the highest ideal, that you would be completely self-sufficient from the family. Now, to get our kids there, individual culture will dive deep into raising their kids to make sure they have all the best opportunities, that they make decisions for themselves. So a kid in an individual culture gets asked this question a lot. What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you like to do? Did you like that? Do you like this? I have A or B. Do you want A or do you want B? Children in individual cultures are making choices all the time. It's like from the very beginning, do you want chocolate cake or vanilla cake, chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? Like the choices are endless for kids in individual cultures. And that is to get them in the practice of knowing who they are so that they can get to that ultimate prime directive. This also means that kids in individual cultures, as soon as they show proficiency and in a skill, so they'll often get put in a lot of different, like, schools are, you're going to go to art, you're going to go to music, you're going to play sports, you have PE, or you give a lot of camps and you have all these different activities in the camp that you sign up for. So all of that is to find out what the kid is proficient in. And as soon as we realize what the kid is good at, all resources get narrowed down for that kid to that. So if you really were good at sports, or if you were good at music or whatever it was, art, your world probably about the age 6 or 7 got really narrow, and a lot of resources were poured into making sure that you got a lot more experiences with that. And then, of course, as you go through high school, what do you want to be when you grow up? What's your purpose in life? Like, you're 15 years old and all this pressure to pick the right college and get this and that. Those are really things you see in individual cultures. Or in individual cultures, you'll find that somehow, even if you decide to not go to school, you are encouraged to get a job and start making your money and find your own place and get roommates and get out into the world. So that will be a high thing that happens there. Collective culture. All right, now we're in collective culture. Collective culture is not going to experience this. What's your purpose in life? And what do you want to be with grow up? No, you're told what you will be when you will grow up. There's no choices. Food is set down and you eat it. The end. Right? That's going to be more of a collective culture. And usually, so where we'll find collective cultures is if there's a family business, or in rural areas where we need more hands and more people working on the family business, like a farm or a country store kind of thing, that the collective culture will rely on the youth, but there's a really strict hierarchy. So it's not even parents that are saying, this is what you'll be and grow up. It's usually generational conversations where grandparents or elders are involved. Homes are usually multi-generational. And children, when they are raised, they are like, we know you will own this business one day and run it, or we know you will be an engineer like all of us. We know you'll be the lawyer or the doctor, whatever it is. It's usually some skill based that the community needs. So we'll find a lot of marginalized groups in the United States that have collective cultures because they've already been segregated or isolated with either language barriers or racial barriers or religious barriers that force them into a more marginalized kind of bubble outside of the greater culture. And so because of that, they usually lack some resources. And so not only if we see a star rising, whether it's an athletic star or math or science kind of star, the community will start to come in to support that individual. And a lot of resources from even beyond the family might get poured into, like scholarships, to send them out and away to the best school. We're going to send you 3,000 miles away. We're going to send you to a different country to get that skill. But then there's the return. So there's always the return. They come back to the neighborhood or to and usually move in back to the family home. Not now, individual cultures, we'll still see kids move back into their family home, but it's always to save money, to get that best job, to find their purpose so that they can go out and be self-sufficient. No, kids in collective culture, once they're adults and they go and get their skill, they come back and move back into the family home. And then paychecks are not usually their own. They are almost always given over to the home budget, and they have an allowance out of it. Instead of in individual cultures, you'll see them, maybe parents might say, okay, you have to contribute while you're living here, trying to figure out who you want to be when you grow up. I thought we dealt with this when you were 7 years old, but let's keep going. You might make like a small donation allowance to the family home, but in collective culture, it would be kind of the opposite. So the best way to think about these ways that children are raised and cultivated in individual cultures is it's the I. You take care. Individual culture is I culture. I will take care of myself because I love my family, because I'm loyal to my family, and I want to do my family proud, right? Where collective cultures are we, your identity is more of a we based, and everything, even you will even refer to yourself in plurals often. What this is what we need, or I will go to study engineering because we need an engineer in the family, or whatever it is. So it's we to the I, and here it's I to the we. So it's just same important family. Both of these have strong family values. Both of these are about family. They just go about how they do family in a little bit different order. Like flip that coin over. I hope that's clear. And if in collective, the pressures are intense for the way kids are raised in both of these groups. Because of all this, there's like a fatigue of decision making and how do I find my purpose? And there's a lot of stress on individualism and collectivism. The stress is on how can I need to be the best at what I've been told to do so I can get back. Now, for families that have different first generation or second generation immigrant families in our current society here in the United States, the home might be very collective culture, but the child is maneuvering. The United States is a predominant individual culture. And so they will often be a rift in the generations as children are at schools asking what they want to be when they grow up, but when they get home, there's no choice. You're going to be this when you grow up, the end. And so often that's really difficult for immigrant families with multi-generations to maneuver through as children are coming up. Okay. I bet you can think of some good TV shows or movies that deal with different ways that these show up. I'd love to hear some of your examples. The next one I want to talk about is gender and communication. So when we talk about gender and communication, we're looking at, I'll talk about masculine speech versus feminine speech. And this is from Deborah Tannen's work. Now, just because I say masculine speech or feminine speech, that doesn't mean I'm talking about the way men talk or the way women talk. That we are looking at cultural communication practices that are ingrained into the society and the way that gender assumptions and gender biases show up. Now, I have definitely had many women who in my classes who identify mostly with masculine speech, and that's no accident. Masculine speech is the predominant speech culture of the United States, and it is the predominant speech culture of our movies and television. And then that's because of stereotypes about gender, and that feminine speech has often been put as nobody wants to watch a bunch of women sit around and talk. So we see our storytelling being more directed to masculine roles, though that has been shifting lately in the culture, which is very exciting. So when I talk, I'm going to go into this, but when I talk about masculine and feminine speech, I want you to think more about your own experiences and how do you adapt or switch and code switch between the two of them, because most of us can do that. Okay, so let's start with feminine speech. Feminine speech, you have a friend when you get a secret. Feminine speech is based on secrets, meaning that it's that insider information. So when feminine speech happens, the two people sit usually facing each other, and heads are usually tilted down. We do know that trying to keep eye contact, and we'll talk about this when we get to masculine speech as well, but direct eye contact is not how we take it. If we're focused a lot on eye contact, we're not going to be able to listen with as much quality. So feminine speech really demands a lot of eye contact, but it's usually in a tilted down way with lots of glances up. But there's a lot more nodding, ahas, and it's usually directed in this kind of orientation of face to face. So there's this in these communication cultures, it looks like it's my turn to talk and your turn to talk is the reciprocity. And if I share a secret, then I'm expecting a secret back. So the pressures in feminine speech is that everything that is shared, we have to stay as the same. We have to have a lot of similarity. Even if it's different, the emotional content is same, and we're trying to expand the conversation. We're trying to move it to be open. So if in this feminine speech culture, if I talk, I'm going to tell you something personal, something that happened to me, and you're sitting there trying to think of what you're going to say that is personal or what happened to you. You're in a more feminine speech world. And if you can't think of anything, sometimes what happens habitually is might ante up someone else's secret, which is why there's sometimes stereotypes about feminine speech being about gossip, but that's because of this really intense pressure to have something to reciprocate in situations. And then it becomes habitual if you just rely on that. The other thing, that's because we don't want any hierarchies. There are hierarchies, but they're secret, they're hidden. And I'll talk about that in a second when we talk about some of the consequences of this style of communication. But the hierarchy is based on if someone seems like they have something different, if they are having a more positive experience, they might start to go up. So a conversation might go like, if this person pays this person a compliment, I like your hat. And this person goes up. Oh my God, that person said they like my hat. That means that danger, I better reciprocate and get. And so there's different choices. I could go, oh, I like your hat. We could just, I moved up. Let's move the other person up. I like your hat. I like your backpack. Bloop, they come up. Okay, great. Whew, got out of that one. Or we could say, this old hat, wah, 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 wah. Right? We might put ourselves down, and that is very acceptable in feminine speech, to put yourself down, to downplay something. And depending on how high you may have gotten up, you might spend quite a bit of time. A feminist speech will spend quite a bit of time putting themselves down. So let's, for example, you found out you're going to have all your tuition and expenses paid for the rest of your time in college, and you go to your friends and go, like, oh my God, I got this incredible scholarship. I won a scholarship. And your friends are like, yeah, I'm so excited. Let's go out and celebrate. But then all night long, you might be working to go, oh my God, you couldn't believe the paperwork and this and that. And oh, the way I suffered. And oh, now this means I got to really keep my GPA up because it has a GPA requirement. Oh, poor me, right? Wah, 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 wah. Which I just have to say before we get to masculine speech, this is very confusing to masculine speech. They do not understand this type of like self-deprecating communication style. All right, so we can bring the other person up, we can bring ourselves down, or we can share a secret. Oh, this hat, where did you get it? Right? Oh, I got it this is why there's all this pressure also in feminist speech to share where you got something, to share the information about it, or actually share the hat itself, which you're just like, I don't want to share my hat. This is my hat. I don't share. But in feminist speech world, it gets really frustrating that you have to share things. And that's because of this pressure. So the reason why there's pressure is the punishments are quite severe here when we don't play the communication game in feminine speech. What happens is, and this is where hierarchies start to play out, is that you get left out. You don't get invited to the party anymore. All of these things make up why feminine speech can get really, really toxic sometimes, or dysfunctional. So when we feel like we're being ghosted or left out, or we're the last to know. So sometimes in families, the communication dynamics, if it's a strong matriarchal family that has a strong feminine speech person that is is influencing the way communication rolls, then what will happen is that person there'll be a competition to who knows what when, and who was the last to know and who is the first to know. And that's kind of the invisible hierarchies that get developed here in feminine speech. So the pressures of being left out, of not getting the insight, getting the information, not being invited to the birthday party, not even knowing there's a birthday party till it's all on social media, or you get back and everyone has the friendship bracelets and you don't have one. And that's kind of how you learn you're not in the group anymore. And those are really, really extremely painful places to be in feminine speech, which is why we feel the pressure to conform to these kind of conversation norms and rituals. That means all day long, feminine speech is like, I have to be careful what I say. I have to pay a compliment. I have to be self-deprecating. Whatever it is, the pressure, I just have to be maneuvering it. So there's this kind of retraction that comes with this type of feminine speech culture group of being careful what I say, which is why we really have a lot of feminine words to attack or put down someone who seems like they are not playing that communication game. And we could talk about that as well another time. Okay, so I talked about feminine speech. Now, these exist on a spectrum and we often code switched. Please do not ever label anyone as being one or the other. As you learn this, allow people to have room to self-identify where they feel like they fit in. The masculine speech is, you have a friend when you have someone to do something with. Activity is the glue of friendship in masculine speech. So masculine speech is, oh, you're my friend. Do you want to go snowboarding? Do you want to go to the game? Right? Like being in these activities are the glue, or you want to go shoot some hoops or come over and play video games, or let's meet up online and play a game, do gaming. And then through the activity is when self-disclosure happens. That's usually when talk happens. So that means back to eye contact. Eye contact happens side by side, not face to face. So when we're in the activity, that's when we do masculine speech. That's when we might get more emotion in our conversation, or we might be willing to share something. Now, remember, feminine speech was secrets are glue. Secrets are glue in masculine speech too, but it happens after it happens during or after the activity. In feminine speech, we're going to talk. Oh, now what should we go? Let's go do something, right? Masculine speech is here. For example, my husband goes hunting once a year with his buddies, and he comes back with the best secrets. He comes in with all the insider information about what's happening at work or what's happening with the other families and their kids and this and that. But they were all tromping around the woods with their guns and boom, 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 and then they self-disclose. That's when it happens, right? It doesn't happen the same way as when I go to my book club. We all sit around a table and we pretend like we've read a book and drink wine, and boy, do we dish, right? We spill the tea, as the kids say. So in masculine speech, when the conversation rituals are to develop a hierarchy specifically. Remember, here we are trying to keep things the same. Over here, we're trying to create a ladder. The ladder is formed, and that's how we know we're in masculine speech. So the way conversation norms go here is, do you have information? Do you know something more? So there's this kind of anting up. And so you climb the ladder by secrets and giving and having information. So someone might say, oh, I know this fact. And someone else will go, oh, well, I knew that. Did you know this? Oh, yeah, I knew that. And I know this, and I know this, and I know this, till we get to the end and someone goes. So there's a tendency in almost a playful, functional way for the hierarchy to include hyperbole and boasting. I caught a fish this big. Well, I caught a fish this big. Well, I caught a fish this big. I hit the ball to the fence. I hit the ball over the fence. I hit the ball over the fence and it hit that building and then it went all the way to the moon. And, oh, whoa, right? This person's the best player because of, and here's their stats. Well, this person's the best player. What about because of these stats? And I know about this stat, and I know about this. And this was why there's always this like kind of, it feels competitive but there's kind of a camaraderie to the competition. Another way is conversation rituals happen in masculine speech is through teasing and razzing. And when teasing and razzing becomes dysfunctional, or when it turns into bullying, which is one of the consequences we find in masculine speech, is when the ladder only allows teasing down and teasing is not allowed up the ladder. So you're in a more functional friendship group in masculine speech when everybody's teasing everyone, even when there's a ladder, which kind of squashes the ladder a little when whoever is the kind of top, or the couple people that are at the top, allow themselves to be teased and think it's fun and laugh, and teasing goes down and up the ladder. Right. One way to think about it is if you've had a parent who's more masculine speech that did a lot of teasing and razzing, there's some parents who will tease their kids, and they're teasing their kids and messing around with them in order to kind of strengthen them and toughen them up so that they can get out in the world and be resilient in a hard, tough world. Right. But some parents won't allow the kids to tease them. That's not allowed. Or some parents love practical jokes when the kids play the practical jokes on the parents, or tease the parents, or do a little kind of razzing back and forth. And so if that's allowed, we're seeing that there's a development of a more low power structure that is more camaraderie or collaborative. Of course, in the workplace, because we deal with so many different communication cultures, and feminine speech does not do well with teasing and razzing. Feminine speech is like Nick say on the teasing A, right? That's not how we're going to roll. So it's when feminine speech looks over at that, they have a tendency like, what did you mean by that? What did you say? What are you saying? Right. And that can be really abruptive in feminine speech. Okay, so back to masculine speech. The other dysfunctional thing that starts to happen here is through who gives orders and who takes orders. So with the latter, everybody's invited to the birthday party. Remember, over in feminine speech, if you weren't trying to be the same as everybody else, or you seem all that in a bag of chips, or even if you seem too down and depressed and you're an energy drain, you're not invited to the party anymore. But here in masculine speech, you're still invited to the party, even if you're the lowest rung on the ladder. And that's because they need someone. You can't have a ladder unless you have all the rungs in the ladder, right? And often the people who find themselves at the bottom of a masculine speech communication ladder will often be asked to do things. For example, in my blended family, my stepkids are much more masculine speech style, and my stepdaughter, who is older than the littlest brother, little brother Joe, who's not so little anymore. He's like over 6 feet. But when he lived with me, he was really little. He'd come up and get a bowl of ice cream, and he'd go down to the family room. And then like 1 minute later, he'd come up and he'd be getting another bowl of ice cream. I'm like, Joe, what are you doing in here? I thought you just got ice cream. He's, Ashley told me to get her ice cream. I'm like, oh, there we go. That's it. Right. And when he was older, I was like, you don't have to get ice cream if you don't want to. And he's like, oh, no, I don't mind. And that's it. Like, if you are masculine speech and you want to be part of the group, and if there is a camaraderie and collaborative low power piece, where that's not being done as a bullying, people are glad to go get the beer for everybody, or go get the go on an ice cream run kind of thing. So that's how kind of it shows up. But both of these gender and communication cultures, again, we don't want to attach this to men talk this way or women talk this way. We're all enculturated in different ways in families, and it's not really tied to our birth assigned gender every time. Okay, so that's gender and communication. The next one I want to talk about is uncertainty avoidance. So uncertainty avoidance culture is the degree of which members of a group or a society accept ambiguous or unknown situations. So in an uncertainty avoidance culture, that means that we're going to find a lot of rules. We're going to find a lot of laws and regulations and formalities about the way that you talk, the way that you behave, your nonverbals, even the way you dress can sometimes be regulated, and we'll have rules about that in really high uncertainty avoidance culture. Low uncertainty avoidance culture is going to be much more open to kind of different ways to go about it. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not concerned with safety and everyone being safe, but there's different values that are rising to the top that create more low uncertainty culture groups. High uncertainty culture groups are going to really have a lot more boundaries about who's in group and out group to that culture group, and how we designated who gets to be in the group and who's outside the group. We're going to signal that with language and other nonverbals and setting and like locations. So that means that sometimes the way children are raised in high uncertainty avoidance cultures is that there is a lot of rules about who they can hang out with, what music they can listen to, what TV shows, and sometimes homeschooling. Not for all homeschool groups, but some homeschool is because of the uncertainty of public education, and maybe societal values don't line up with their in-group culture. So they'll want to take charge of the education for their kids and disconnect from that societal, handing that over to the society to do. Different religious groups will have also a lot of regulation about clothes, and sometimes they have different gender is more binary divided in some religious groups, and clothing becomes a distinctive way that they underline how people are dressed, and that means that who you can date or who you can talk to or whether you can even shake hands become very strict rules. Those are high uncertainty avoidance cultures. And then there's also like lots of laws and rules about safety. So in the United States, our Food and Drug Administration, the fact that we have a lot of rules about vaccines or water and medicine, things like that, or traffic laws, gun safety, things like that. Those are things that we put a lot of laws and rules around for the safety of the group. Now, you might find yourself like, I don't need everything laid out for me and I can make my own decisions. And we have a lot of people who have to live in the United States who don't always agree with all of those high uncertainty avoidance laws and regulations. And when that happens, that's why the safety argument comes in as the way that we say that, I'm sorry, it's about group safety. So let me give an example. Let's say there's a group that is going to a convention, and they're all going to rent a van and go to this convention. maybe it's a workplace thing that we're going to go to, or maybe it's a group of students and they're going to go to something for education reasons. Whatever it is, there's a big road trip involved, and on the road there's an exit, food next exit, and one of the exit signs, it has all those little, you know, uh, brands on it, like it says McDonald's, Starbucks, Subway, uh, KFC, whatever, all the different ones, right? And when everybody's like, yay, let's all pull off, and there's enough things for everybody to try, and everyone's happy. But all of a sudden, pulling off along the side of the road, there's this all rundown cabin, not in the woods, alongside the road. But the shutters are kind of loose. It hasn't been painted in like 35 years. And there's a hand painted sign that says Joe's Famous Pancakes. And there's maybe only one or two cars kind of out in front of it. And someone in the van goes, that looks great. Let's all go there. And I'm like, we're not going there. What is that place? I never even heard of it. And he's like, oh, you're a bunch of cowards. Just drop me off and pick me up on the way out of town. I'm going to go there and get the best pancakes. I want world famous pancakes. And they're like, nope, we're not dropping you off. You're going to Subway like the rest of us, and you'll like it because your safety is tied to our safety. And so that's kind of like the way uncertainty avoidance culture will show up. Okay. Boy, that is a lot of information. We went over individualism and collectivism. We went over gender, and we talked about uncertainty avoidance. And if you're looking at different if you're watching TV, I really challenge you to see if you can see these communication cultures pop out. I said masculine speech culture is the dominant culture of our entertainment. But one way you can find feminine speech is through comedy and masculine speech, right? But comedy that stars men like Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn in Wedding Crashers is a great example of feminine speech culture in action. Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson are excellent at feminine speech. Those Actually, Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart also do that in Central Intelligence. And then if we want to find comedy masculine speech, just look for those ensemble pieces that star mostly women, like the most current Ghostbusters movie, Pitch Perfect, Bridesmaids. Those are all playing around with masculine speech cultures and the juxtaposition of feminine performance with masculine speech culture, masculine performance with feminine speech cultures is part of. Sorry to ruin why you're laughing, but that's why you're laughing. There's a lot more. There's low context and high context, monochronic and polychronic, and hopefully and low power, high power. But we have a whole week on power, so I'm going to save my power talk for a little bit later in the term. But I hope these help you as you look through your next assignments, and I can't wait to see how you start bringing out some of these examples in your writings and things coming up. Talk to everyone later. Bye-bye.